When the New York Mets initially agreed to a contract with Carlos Correa, it certainly seemed like Steve Cohen was driving those talks. Now, after things broke down due to the medicals, Billy Eppler has been negotiating with Scott Boras on a deal that could keep Correa in a Mets uniform for a decade. If he nails this contract, could Billy Eppler become the next president of the New York Mets? I'll be discussing that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I had this thought today as I was going for a little jog, and I was like, what do we talk about right now, right? Because we're in this Carlos Correa stalemate, and you're just wondering what's going to happen here. Are these sides going to be able to come to terms? And really, the radio silence, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, is a good thing. This means that these two sides are working amicably towards a deal. Mike Mayer of Metsmerize had a little bit of a report today. It wasn't anything concrete, like he knows what's happening. All he said was he has yet to speak with somebody within the Mets organization that is pessimistic about a deal getting done. Now, that does not mean that this is guaranteed to get pushed across the finish line, but these sides are trying to come together on this one, and this is where Billy Eppler is really going to make his money and really prove his worth as a general manager and potentially as the president of the New York Mets, which made me want to kind of go back for a minute and realize that he's been in charge of this team and the baseball operations for about 13 months. And what has happened in that 13 months when it comes to talent acquisition is remarkable. And also talent retention in the farm system while they got so much better. And obviously Steve Cohen deserves a lion's share of the credit in that it is his big pocketbook that has allowed the Mets to get a payroll where with luxury tax penalties, we're looking at $500 million, $500 million baseball team next season. And, this past year, the payroll was $268 million. So Steve Cohen deserves a lot of credit. But let's also remember what the first year of ownership was with Steve Cohen's money and how things have begun to transform. You have a disaster trying to find a manager and a general manager. Well, I guess at the time they were sticking with Rojas as manager, but trying to figure out who's the general manager. Is Sandy still the president? All of that stuff. They land on Jared Porter. Jared Porter ends up having to get fired in scandal. His replacement, Zach Scott, fired in scandal. And the moves that they made in that year, not necessarily great. The best one, Francisco Lindor, is traded to the Mets. And I would say that I'd still do that deal again, but you do have to note that Andres Gimenez became an all-star this year and showed signs in 2020. A big part about running a team is scouting your own talent. And Andres Gimenez was a piece that the Mets had, and could they have made that same exact trade with Ronnie Mauricio instead of Andres Gimenez? Who knows? The Guardians might have done better homework on the Mets farm system, and they might have always loved Gimenez, and they were spot on it, but that's just a footnote on that trade that we're going to have to monitor, right? Again, we just saw all the shortstops go and how hard it is to land one of these guys. I mean, Carlos Correa, perfect example here. Getting Lindor, I don't think is a bad move, but that's just one piece that left the farm. They also traded Pete Crow Armstrong for Javi Baez. That's a move you like to have back. Now, granted, Baez, very productive with the Mets. If the Mets went on a World Series run that year, you wouldn't have cared, but they didn't. And even though Trevor Williams was really good, that's still a prospect you wish you still had. Meanwhile, you signed James McCann, which the Mets just had to basically eat his contract to get rid of him. They went out and they got Kevin Pillar, Jonathan Villar, and ultimately it amounted to a ball club that was under 500. Now, and had a horrible collapse too. You fast forward to the period between the end of last season where they were just operating with no GM after the Zach Scott incident with the DUI. to trying to find someone, striking out. Why does no one want to work with the Mets? They were about to get some guy who was working in the financial industry. Was it Matt Arnold or something? I can't even remember who his name. I just remember doing all these shows. Who's the GM going to be? They finally land on Billy Eppler. And look at how legitimate this franchise has run since then. You can quibble with his history with the Angels all you want to. But what he's done since he's been here is he has been a steady hand guiding Steve Cohen's money in the right direction. He was working out of a hotel room, just doing Zoom calls and trying to figure things out, signing Eduardo Escobar, signing Mark Canha right after he got hired, signing Starling Marte. Then what's he do? He gets Max Scherzer to agree. And granted, again, of course, Steve Cohen, big part of all of this. But Billy Eppler still is the guy with the experience that has to get these deals hammered out. And he did that. He made a trade for Chris Bassett. You know what Adam Oller did last year for Oakland? He was terrible. They had, who was the other pitching prospect that won that deal? Oh, man. Name is escaping me. I'm picturing him. I got to look it up. JT Ginn. Okay, actually, you won't believe me on this, but it came to me as I was trying to Google it. Yeah, JT Ginn won that deal and didn't have the best year. Now, I'm not saying I'm rooting against JT Ginn, but again, you got a pitcher in Chris Bassett that really was your most valuable starter last year. I know Max Scherzer ultimately probably was with that if I'm not mistaken, but just by virtue of being healthy all year and really driving things, Bassett was incredible for the Mets. Nice trade by Billy Eppler. You go through a season where in his first year running the team, you win 101 games. The depth that they acquired that helped them get through the injuries, to be able to survive missing DeGrom, missing Scherzer for a period of time. Tyler McGill, big part of the team, he goes down. Rotation stayed afloat because they made that extra move to get a Chris Bassett. They were able to find the right pieces during the season. Now, a lot of people quibble with the deadline, and I get it. Daniel Vogelbach, that was a nice trade. Michael Givens, obviously that one didn't work out, but you didn't give up anything crazy. And obviously Darren Ruff didn't work out. But again, you went through a season where you got to 101 wins. You were in the exact same position as the Braves, but they just beat you in the season series, so you lost the division. But you were right there, and your farm system still has Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio, Matt Allen, Calvin Ziegler. Like, you didn't trade any of your real top-tier guys with Billy Eppler in place. He has come in with a strategy, and up to this point, it has been working. The idea is we're using Steve Cohen's money, which is great that he's giving you this financial wherewithal, but you are using that money over this short window while not touching your farm so that in the future, you're going to have the prospect assets to eventually be able to not only, fill the needs on your own roster, but use the farm to make big trades when you have to. And that leads into this offseason where I think Billy Eppler has only continued to show how good he can be, or how good he is right now as the Mets GM. And if he can figure out a way to get Carlos Correa on this roster on a contract that's not going to be backbreaking for the New York Mets in 6 years, well, guess what? He might deserve to be the president of baseball operations for the New York Mets. And we're going to discuss that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by the NHTSA. So imagine this. You're hanging out with some friends. Maybe it's New Year's, and you're putting back a few drinks, and then a few drinks suddenly becomes a few drinks too many. As the evening starts to wear down, people are heading out, and you think of calling for a ride, but you're like, nah, you know what? I live nearby. I can make it home okay. It's not that bad. What are the odds that you're going to get pulled over anyway? And even if so, what's the worst thing that can happen? Your insurance goes up. Maybe you lose your license. Oh, wait, you can lose your job. You could total your car. Even worse, you can kill someone. Everyone knows the risk of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again, play it safe, and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. So we look back at Billy Eppler's first year running the Mets. It's a 101-win team, a really solid offseason. You can quibble with the deadline, but ultimately the farm system did not take a massive hit like it did the year prior with Pete Crow Armstrong. You still had all your chips in line to go for it big this season. And the question was, how would the Mets attack this offseason? Again, No real big trades. Brooks Raley was the one trade, and there was some prospects you might like in that deal, but Keyshawn Askew. But overall, I mean, the top prospects have not been dealt. Meanwhile, look at the talent that has been added. You were in an offseason where you had the potential to lose Brandon Nimmo, Edwin Diaz, and Jacob deGrom. You kept 2 of the 3, and you replaced deGrom with Justin Verlander. You had to rebuild your rotation and your bullpen. You go with Verlander, you get Jose Quintana, you get Kodai Senga, an absolute Billy Eppler move. The same guy that brought Shohei Ohtani to the States gets the biggest, Japanese international free agent this year in Kodai Senga. So you have him in place. Your bullpen, you get David Robertson in. You bring back Adam Ottavino. You made that trade I just mentioned for Brooks Raley. You also make a trade for Jeff Brigham, where if you look at the top pitches on the Mets this past season on the current 40-man roster, the second best pitch outside of Edwin Diaz's slider is Jeff Brigham's slider. So I think he could be a nice piece of this Mets team. And as much as I love Jake Mangum, 4th outfielder ceiling, it feels like, with that prospect, who, again, a little bit older, 26 years old, might be turning 27 by opening day. Not a bad trade at all. So the Mets have been operating with a clear plan under Billy Eppler, and it has been working. And granted, Steve Cohen's money, big part of it, but you still need the right hand making it all happen. And that leads us to the Carlos Correa signing. Scott Boras loves to call owners. And so as soon as the Giants deal was falling through, he said, wow, I got some calls from Steve Cohen at the 11th hour last time on Correa before we got that Giants deal hammered out. Let me call him up. Where you at? Oh, you're in Hawaii? Oh, how you doing, buddy? Drinking some martinis? You got $3 in the glass? How about $3 for a third baseman? Woo! Give me $315 million. Steve Cohen, gladly. Love it. This is the piece that puts us over the top. Let me call John Heyman. Let me tell him. Let's get it on the post. Let's get fans excited. Let's sell tickets. Let's go, 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 go. You love the enthusiasm. Billy Eppler is probably on the East Coast at this point, gets a call about this at, 1 o'clock in the morning. We're doing what, Steve? That's incredible. Okay. Yeah, you want to spend $315 million on Carlos Correa? What's the injury? Oh, that's what Scott says, and maybe Scott explained it to him. All right, well, we'll get him checked out medically. Boom. Have a deal in place. Then all this happens again. Now they are working to get a contract that can be signed here that doesn't hurt the Mets into the future, which again is always Billy Eppler's long-term vision here is let's win in the short term. Let's make sure that we're a self-sufficient, quality franchise that can make moves and continue to add into the future. If Billy Eppler has his druthers right now, he sees the guy he came up under in Brian Cashman. He'd love to be a New York general manager for 20 years, get all bald entirely as the Mets GM and, become the president of baseball. Like, that's, of course, his career aspirations. And he would love to win multiple World Series and, go to Cooperstown as a great executive. That's anybody who's driven to work in sports has those types of aspirations. And he has the best owner in sports to work with, and he just has to make these things happen for Steve Cohen. So if he can find a way with Scott Boras to get a contract through to the finish line where if Carlos Correa in 6 years breaks down, the Mets are going to be okay, as much as you can think about it, David Stearns, you got to look at Billy Eppler, who has a track record as a GM. Maybe you didn't love what he did with the Angels, but, he was on a 4-year contract. He got an extension, and then he got fired. But it's not like he was a complete failure. He did get a second contract from the last team that hired him as a GM. On a 4-year deal with the Mets. This is year 2. Billy Eppler has the chance to be the president of baseball operations for the Mets. And honestly, he should be the betting favorite right now. But if there is another guy that could enter the fray that maybe Billy Eppler would be happy to move aside for, it's David Stearns. That's what I want to discuss next. Could David Stearns be the president of the New York Mets next year? We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Right now, Mets plus 700 to win the World Series. If you want to bet on that and more, head to the website today to use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So could David Stearns be the next president of the New York Mets? Right now, he's still an advisor with the Brewers, but he took a step down. What was the point of that? Where is he going? There's been a lot of connections, a lot of rumblings between David Stearns, New York Mets. Guy grew up in the area, who might view this as his dream job, and whose dream job or what executive in baseball is not looking at that president seat, seeing the money that's just spent and be like, man, I'd love to be having fun with Billy Eppler right now, spreading cash all over the place. I'm sure there's a lot of interest there, and they're longtime friends. So if Steve Cohen says we want to bring in David Stearns into this front office and he had a ton of success in Milwaukee and we're going to make him the president of baseball operations and you are going to remain the GM, it's not bad being Jed Hoyer for the Cubs, all those years under Theo and also in Boston. Not bad. Obviously, if David Stearns comes in, he'll get some of the credit, but Billy Eppler has been here, been making moves. I think that's the one guy that's out there that could become the next president of baseball operation for the Mets that makes sense. But I also think that it could just be Billy Eppler, man. As much as you want to nitpick what he did with the Angels, what he's done at the deadline, man, think about the way this team was run. Outside of early 2010 Sandy Alderson, when's the last time this team has just felt as professionally run as they've been under Billy Eppler and Buck Showalter? They had a pocket there with Terry Collins and Sandy Alderson with some continuity where, the farm system was on the upswing and you had a real period where the Wilpons took a step back and let them build organically. There were some rough years, as you went through the David Wright injury and you transitioned from the Beltran Reyes Wright era. And then you got to a culmination of 2015 and 2016 where the team was good and that pitching that you built up really did lead you. And then there was the fall off, and then you had the bad years at the end for Sandy Alderson. You went to the GM triumvirate where Alderson fell on his sword. You hired Brody Van Wagenen, which was an unmitigated disaster. Large part of that was Jeff Wilpon still running baseball operations with him. Steve Cohen's first year comes in, as I already mentioned, all the drama there. You finally got it. You're right where you want to be. You got a manager who is great with the media, who your players love that they're playing for. You got a GM who is not making a bunch of debilitating trades. And they've been able to land free agents, and say what you want about the money spent. These are good deals. The only contract that you have here that spans beyond the 2-year window is, we have the Correa possible contract. You have Nima, who is your guy, and Diaz, who is your guy. And then you have Kodai Senga, who can opt out for the 3rd year. So if he opts out after that 3rd year, and you look at the books in 2026 right now, it's Lindor, and then it's like your pre-arb guys, and it's Nimmo and it's Diaz. It's those 3 really. So I've loved what the Mets have done. You always have to credit Cohen first at this point, but Billy Eppler's been a big part of it, and if he can figure out this Correa situation that's advantageous for the Mets, a home run to the offseason could lead to a promotion for Billy Eppler. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. This will be the last show of the week unless we finally get some resolution on Correa. As always, though, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around sports. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.